I want us to take some time now to talk about the relationship between fractions and percent. Now, first, a little quick introduction into what percent is. Percent is a kind of fractional number. Now, there's actually three different kinds of fractional numbers. The main one we think about is what we actually call fractions, right? Fraction is a part of a whole, and we know that we write a numerator, which tells how many parts we're talking about, and the denominator is the number of equal parts in a whole. And so, for example, if we look at the grid on the right, let's pretend this is a theater, and in that theater, we notice that there's 100 seats, and if the pink X's represent people sitting there, we know that there are 100 equal parts in the theater, and that 55 of them are filled. And so we would say that 55 hundredths of this theater is filled. And the great thing about fractions is that we can actually discuss any relationship of two numbers this way. It's a ratio is really what it is. 55 seats out of 100 seats are full. We could even simplify that, and we could say that we have 11/20ths are full. You can use any numerator and any denominator. And that's the cool thing about fractions. We've also talked about a more limited fractional number called decimals. So, for example, decimals are fractions, but they only come in base 10 numbers. They come in tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and so on. You can't have thirds in decimals. And so we could write hundredths is a base 10 number, so we could even say 55 hundredths is a decimal. But the one we're about to add is percent. And percent is the most special of all of the kinds of fractional numbers. It can only do one thing. Let's talk about what this means. The word per means out of, and the word cent means 100. So one way to think of percent is it's a fraction, but the denominator is always 100, and so we don't even have to write it. If it's 55 out of 100, that means 55%. So when we write the percent sign, that means the same thing as 55 out of 100, or we could say 55 hundredths. In other words, these three numbers that I have over here, 55 hundredths, 0.55, which is also 55 hundredths, and 55%. Those all mean the exact same thing, that 55 out of 100 seats are filled in this theater. And so understanding that, it's really easy to make fractions into percent. Okay, let's take a look at some other fractions we can make into percent. Okay. The first I want us to look at is going to be 33 out of 100. And then I want us to look into this percentage, 4 out of 10. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can write both of those as a percent. Okay, I hope you have. Now the first one we should actually see 33 out of 100, which is also the same thing as 33 hundredths, or even 0.33. Well, out of 100 means percent, so it's the same thing as 33%. If we have a fraction over 100, if we can just get rid of the 100 and make it percent. Now 4 out of 10 is a little different. It's 4 tenths as a fraction, or 0.4 is 4 tenths as a decimal. Now if we wanted to make it into a percent, we'd have to recognize that 4 tenths is the same as what number out of 100. If it's out of 10, it's not a percent. Percent has to be out of 100. And we'll recognize 10 times 10 is 100, and so 4 tenths is the same as 40 hundredths. And so 4 tenths is actually the same as 40%. And we can use that all the time. We know that 1 tenth is 10%, that 2 tenths is 20%, 3 tenths is 30%, and so on. And that's very useful to be able to understand. Okay, I want us to try one more, a very common percent that it's good to know. I want us to look at this situation. We're going to have a wall. Let me draw a wall real quick. And we're going to divide the wall into 4 equal pieces. And then we're going to paint 3 of those pieces. Okay, and we're going to decide what percentage of the wall has he painted. I want you to take a minute to try to see if you can figure out what percentage of the wall he's painted. And then we're going to talk about 2 ways to do it. Okay, I hope you've taken some time to do that. Here's what I want us to see. We should first of all say that 3 out of 4 parts of the wall are painted. But percentage, we want to know percentage out of 100. And I hope most of us who are good with quarters recognize that 4 times 25 is 100. And if we multiply the denominator times 25, we know from our fraction skills we can do the numerator, and it is 75 out of 100 equal parts of the wall are painted. So 3/4 is the same thing as 75%, which is our answer, 75% of the wall. You don't always have numbers that go into 100 so easily. For a while, we're going to intentionally work with some really easy numbers that are factors of 100. But if you wanted to know another way that would work, and this is shown in our textbook actually, you can do it this way as well. You can say 3/4 times 100%. And percent is our unit. And the reason we can do that is because percent, 100% is a whole. 100% is the whole thing. And so multiplying a number times 100% is like multiplying it by 1. And so we would do 3 times 100%, which is 300% over 4. And so we could just do, this is of course 300 divided by 4. And if you do 300 divided by 4, you get 75. So it is also 75%. That way is not easier on when numbers can go into 100, but there will be some times in the future we need to be able to do it that way.